Okay, everyone's going to start using or have to start using his head. Do not believe everything you read on the internet. Over the long holiday weekend, things got really crazy on social media. So here it is, the truth. President Trump is alive. You can see that for yourself by watching his big announcement.
And I am thrilled to report that the U.S. Space Command headquarters will move to the beautiful locale of a place called Huntsville, Alabama, forever to be known from this point forward as Rocket City. Okay, so Huntsville, Alabama, we love Alabama. I only won it by about 47 points. I don't think that influenced my decision, though, right?
And of course, if you know President Trump, and I know you do, you know that after that announcement, he took questions from the press.
I don't need this heat, but when I watched television last night and I'm watching the news and I see that 9 people were killed in Chicago and 54 were badly wounded with bullets, I say, that's not this country. We have to do something. Without the tariffs, we wouldn't have a chance because we wouldn't be able to protect those investments of the companies coming in. So if you took away tariffs, we could end up being a third world country. We have a man named Jerome Too Late Powell. You probably heard of him. He's too late. He's way too late. And the economy is so strong that it's pushing through that. Normally, it would have been much tougher, but we're doing so well that we're pushing through it. But it makes it very hard for people to get mortgages because too late is too late.
White House correspondent Mike Carter is here with the very latest. Mike?
Hey, Greta, good evening. For the last several years, Colorado Springs, Colorado has been home to U.S. Space Command Central Headquarters. But today, President Trump's announcing no more. Huntsville, Alabama, a.k.a. Rocket City, is the new home of SpaceCom. Now, of course, SpaceCom, U.S. Space Command, employs members across multiple branches of the U.S. military, including Space Force, and is responsible for military operations in outer space. Trump's decision today to move SpaceCom to Alabama reverses a move made under former President Biden, who chose Colorado Springs as the command's home in 2023, though Trump did want to move it to Huntsville in his first term. Alabama and Colorado have long battled to claim SpaceCom due to its significant implications for the local economy. And today's announcement is expected to bring in more than 30,000 jobs and hundreds of billions of dollars to Alabama. Huntsville has long been home to NASA's Marshall Space Flight Center and the Army's Space and Missile Defense Command. SpaceX even has an office there. Today, the president saying his decision to move the command center was made in large part due to lobbying efforts by Alabama lawmakers, but also as a way of penalizing Colorado for its adamant dedication to mail-in voting.
The problem I have with Colorado, one of the big problems, they do mail-in voting. They went to all mail-in voting. So they have automatically crooked elections, and we can't have that. When a state is for mail-in voting, that means they want dishonest elections because that's what that means. So that played a big factor also.
This move will save the taxpayers $480 million. It's not going to cost more. It's going to cut $480 million.
And as you mentioned, Greta, rumors were swirling this Labor Day weekend about the status of President Trump's health, since he had largely remained out of the sight of media for much of the last week. Well, those rumors were put largely to bed yesterday when the president was seen leaving the White House to head to his Trump National Golf Course in Sterling, Virginia. Today, President Trump addressing the rumors of his demise head on.
Last week, I did numerous news conferences, all successful. They went very well, like this is going very well. And then I didn't do any for 2 days, and they said, there must be something wrong with him. Biden wouldn't do them for months. You wouldn't see him. And nobody ever said there was ever anything wrong with him, and we know he wasn't in the greatest of shape.
This afternoon, Secretary of State Marco Rubio confirming President Trump's statement today that the U.S. military conducted a lethal strike, killing 11 positively identified Tren de Aragua narco-terrorists, this according to SecDef Pete Hegseth, in the South Caribbean, who were running a drug ship that had departed from Venezuela. Venezuela's president, Nicolas Maduro, who the U.S. is accused of being involved in a drug cartel and also has put a $50 million bounty on for his capture, accuses the United States of seeking regime change in Venezuela. And Maduro says his country, Greta, is at maximum preparedness for any potential U.S. strikes inside Venezuela. Greta?
Mike, in addition to the fact that Trump does not like mail-in voting in Colorado, do you think his decision was at all influenced by the fact that Colorado tried to keep him off the ballot in Colorado, and the case had to go all the way to the Supreme Court, where the Supreme Court 9-0 agreed with Trump and said Colorado was wrong? Do you think that had any bearing? Does he have hard feelings towards Colorado?
Well, there's no doubt that I'm sure that played somewhat of a factor, Greta. But the president also today, not only mentioning the number of aerospace facilities that are in Alabama, but he also really lauded Alabama, saying, look, they voted overwhelmingly in the last election. Alabama has always been good for me. So I think Alabama's willingness to vote for Trump and Colorado's, well, more liberal tendencies has no doubt played a role in this move from Spacecom, moving from Colorado Springs to Huntsville.
Mike Carter at the White House. Thank you, Mike. And it must be Bring Your Daughter to Work Day. Earlier today, North Korean leader Kim Jong-un, in his personal armored train, arrived in Beijing, and he brought with him his daughter, Kim Ju-ae. The two were in Beijing to attend China's largest ever military parade. Tomorrow's parade will commemorate the 80th anniversary of Japan's surrender in World War II, but that's not all. During his trip to Beijing, Kim Jong-un is also expected to meet with Chinese President Xi Jinping and Russian President Vladimir Putin. Three dictators in one nation, in one room. National security correspondent for the Washington Times and author of Deceiving the Sky, Inside Communist China's Drive for Global Supremacy. Bill Gertz joins me. Nice to see you, Bill. Is there a message that the three in the same room, the three dictators, were sending to the United States, or was it just simply a commemoration of the 80th anniversary?
No, clearly, Chinese are seeking to project the idea that they are not isolated, when in fact they're very isolated. China's surrounded by states that it considers basically hostile to its communist regime. And having Putin and Kim Jong-un in the same dais is going to be quite a spectacle. Now, the Chinese are also touting that a total of 26 foreign leaders are going to be there. Most of them are either allied with China or neutral towards Beijing.
But today, President Trump, just as a piece of history, called Huntsville, Alabama, where he's moving the Space Command, Rocket City. But it was not so long ago that he was calling Kim Jong-un Rocket Man. I wonder, sort of looking forward to, what is the relationship with the United States and North Korea going forward? It's been chilly for decades, and at times even worse than chilly.
Right, and you have the emergence of a new alliance between Moscow and Pyongyang, with North Korea sending tens of thousands of troops, tons of artillery pieces, and other military equipment to help the flagging Russian war in Ukraine. Obviously, Xi Jinping is trying to lead this new kind of axis of evil, along with Iran. I'm not sure the Iranian leader is going to be there, but they just had a summit meeting in Tianjin, which is outside of Beijing, and were able to attract a number of foreign leaders to that meeting as well. This idea of China celebrating a victory in World War II is really a fabrication. The Chinese Communist Party had almost no role in defeating the Japanese during World War II. Most of the fighting was done by Chiang Kai-shek's nationalist forces. And in fact, as I reported in my story in the Washington Times on this, basically the Chinese Communist Party had an agreement with the Soviet Union not to go after the Japanese forces based on their ideological alignment, both being Marxist-Leninists.
What happened to China invading Taiwan? There's a period of time, and not so far, in the last couple of years, everyone's been talking about China's going to invade Taiwan, and they're all this saber rattling. Have things now calmed down?
Well, President Trump said recently that he was informed by Xi Jinping that China would not invade Taiwan on his watch. And he said they better not do it. Of course, how can you be sure this isn't some kind of strategic deception on the part of the Chinese leader? Clearly, all the signs are pointing to some type of military action, getting ready for some type of military action on the part of the People's Liberation Army against Taiwan. And it's not disinformation or strategic deception. They really are building up their forces with key forces. For example, just recently, a number of civilian ferries were sent to areas across from Taiwan for exercises. The Chinese also showed off some bridging equipment that would allow tanks and troops to extend from the sea across minefields and things. In other words, it was basically a Taiwan scenario. And in this military parade that's scheduled for tomorrow, they're expected to show off an array of new weapons, new missiles, new hypersonic missiles, new laser equipment, and a host of other equipment that, again, is going to be a major saber rattling for Xi Jinping, again, declaring that he's going to retake that island.
Bill Gertz, thank you.
Thank you, Greta.
Coming up, the 6-week recess is over and it's back to work for the House and the Senate. Well, they better work pretty fast because on September 30th, the government runs out of money, and you know what happens then. The news when the record returns. Today, both the House and the Senate returned to Washington after the recess, and now they face a big work deadline. Lawmakers have until October 1st to fund the government or face a government shutdown. Some congressional leaders are already admitting they will probably need to pass a short-term funding extension known as a continuing resolution. But the two parties must agree to pass that. Government funding expires midnight on September 30th. Also today, the House Oversight Committee met with 10 people who have accused disgraced financier Jeffrey Epstein of sex trafficking. Last month, Kentucky Congressman and House Oversight Committee Chairman James Comer issued a subpoena to the Department of Justice for documents related to Epstein. Ghislaine Maxwell was also subpoenaed for a deposition before the House Oversight Committee, but that deposition has been postponed indefinitely. And now crossing Capitol Hill to the Senate. Today, the Senate convened and resumed consideration of the motion to proceed the National Defense Authorization Act for the 2026 fiscal year. The National Defense Authorization Act is legislation that authorizes defense spending and sets policy for the Department of Defense. And another issue the Senate is facing is the confirmation process. As of right now, 0 of President Donald Trump's civilian nominees have been confirmed by the Senate by voice vote or unanimous consent. It's the only time recorded in history that the Senate has not done this at this point in an incoming administration. Oklahoma Senator, member of the Senate Select Committee on Intelligence, and the author of the book, Turn Around America's Revival, Senator James Lankford joins me. Nice to see you, sir.
Good to see you again.
What's holding up these confirmations on these? Because a lot of them are ambassadors, and ambassadors are profoundly important in all over the world. They represent us.
They're not just ambassadors. They're the assistant secretary in all the different agencies. They're lower level, what's called sub-cabinet officials. These are traditionally folks that we pass by voice vote on it. There's about 1,200 people that have to go through the confirmation process and a vote. If you have to have 3 hours for every single person times 1,200 people, do the math. We don't have time for legislation at all. So that means typically they move by voice vote. They pass in the committee, they come to the full body, they get a chance to pass there. If you go back to George W. Bush or H.W. Bush or Clinton, 90 to 98% of the folks were passed by voice votes. Under this president or President Trump, 0 by voice vote. They're literally dragging out, so we can't get to the National Defense Authorization, can't do anything else because we're working on just personnel.
Well, that may be getting back at Trump. They may not like Trump, but unfortunately, It's getting back at the American people, and all these people play very important roles. Who is the architect of the opposition of this?
Yeah, it's Chuck Schumer. Yeah, he has created this. In fact, if you want to go back 20 years ago, we didn't ever have a block like this where it's called a cloture vote required until Chuck Schumer created that 20 years ago. And now it is just borne the fruit now that it's locking everything up. And so we're going to certainly do this to the next Democrat president.
Well,
There'll be the tit for tat, and it doesn't solve the problem. We've got to solve the problem.
Well, that's just it. I mean, it's like he has no vision that if you do that now, the Republicans, when the shoe's on the other foot, it's going to be done to him. It's much like Senator Harry Reid with the filibuster and federal judges in the Supreme Court. And he thought they'd get away with that. And then all of a sudden the Republicans took over and they did it to the Democrats.
That's correct. So we're trying to, there's a group of us been meeting with some Democrat senators saying, okay, I get your opposition to President Trump. You don't agree with President Trump. The American people do, but you do not. I get that. So I understand your protest on this. But we've still got to be able to solve this problem long term for the Senate, or we can't do legislation. So I've been in conversation over August. Several of us have with some Democrats say, how can we get this rule change done so we can actually fix the process long term? Most of them say, I don't want to help President Trump in any way. I was like, you're actually helping the country, is what you're actually doing in the Senate long term on this, to try to be able to figure out the process on this. But we've got to be able to move, not just one at a time. We've got to be able to move in blocks. Typically, when you vote on these, by the time you get through the committee, they know they're going to pass on the floor, so we'll vote on 30, 40, 50 at a time. That's typical for the Senate. You go back as far as you want to be able to go. That's very normal for these lower sub-cabinet officials that we vote in large blocks on that. We've got to be able to get back to that. So I'm trying to be able to work in a bipartisan way to do that. If we can't do that, we're going to have to call their bluff.
Well, that doesn't bode well then for the government funding, I don't think.
Right. Which we've got to get 12 appropriation bills done in the next 4 weeks, which is a challenge. We're going to have some kind of continuing resolution.
An impossibility, looking at the horizon.
It's not impossible. In fact, I've had a bill for years that want to take government shutdowns off the table entirely. Government shutdowns actually spend more taxpayer dollars. They don't save money, they lose money. Federal employees get the time off, but they always get paid anyway on it. So it creates a problem. Plus, it makes us look terrible on the world stage if we can't figure out what we're going to do on this. We have big budget fights. We should have the budget fight, but we shouldn't have a government shutdown while we're having the fight on it. Let's have the fight without that. So the bill that I have actually says if we don't have the funding done by the time we get to the end of the fiscal year, we just stay in continuous session 7 days a week. You can't move to anything other than appropriations until you get that work done. It's an easy way to say keep the fight going, but keep the American people held harmless.
See, I think we should lock you all in the Capitol.
It's great. I mean that's
lock
exactly
you all
what
in
it
the
does.
Capitol until finally you get hungry enough.
Well, this requires 7 days a week. We're in session. You can't leave. You can't fly home. Can't see your family. Can't go on Codell's. Can't go on any other.
You could take their iPhones too.
It would be great. It'd be like it is in school in Oklahoma right now. You can't have a phone in class. Just go ahead and lock us all in so you can get the work done. The goal of it is to get the work done for the American people. It's not about the drama. There are people getting caught up with they love government shutdown because it's drama on TV.
Yeah, it's great for cable news. It's like full employment for us when you guys do that.
It doesn't
help the country at all.
Right, and that's what we're trying to do. Is I've put this proposal out year after year. I've had some good support for this. The entire Republican conference is supportive. Sometimes Democrats are supportive of it. Sometimes they're not. We've got to get enough to be able to get 60 votes in the Senate to actually get it passed and to take this off the table, no matter who's president and what the situation is. Let's have the budget fights, but let's not have the American people have to suffer through all this. Let's have the members of Congress suffer through it.
Senator James Lankford from Oklahoma. Thank you, sir.
You bet. Good to see you again.
Nice to see you. Today, New York Congressman Jerry Nadler, who's been in Congress since 1992, made a big political announcement. In a statement, Nadler wrote in part, quote, "For more than 32 years, I've had the honor of serving the people of New York in the United States Congress, and today I'm announcing that I will not be seeking re-election next year and that this term in Congress will be my last. This decision has not been easy, but I know in my heart it's the right one and that it is the right time to pass the torch to a new generation," end quote. Now, Nadler told the New York Times, quote, "Watching the Biden thing really said something about the necessity for generational change in the party, and I think I want to respect that," end quote. If Nadler had decided to seek re-election, he would have, though, faced a primary. At least one person, 26-year-old Liam Elkin, had already announced he would primary Nadler. And as an aside, Nadler has had other primary challenges in the past years, but he has always won. Coming up, tens of thousands of troops are getting deployed. Find out where they're headed. That when the record continues. A big deployment is happening in Israel. Tens of thousands of reservists are being called into action. This is because Israel is moving forward with its offensive in Gaza City. Israel says Gaza City is Hamas's political and military stronghold. The city is also believed to have a large network of underground tunnels that are still functioning. Middle East correspondent Zach Anders is in Tel Aviv, where it is 1:25 in the morning. Zach?
Well, good evening, Greta. Israel beginning that mass mobilization today. That order is going out to tens of thousands of reservist soldiers. 60,000 in total, I'm told, are getting that call-up order. And in a video addressed to IDF soldiers, Prime Minister Netanyahu telling his troops that this is a, quote, decisive stage of the war and that, quote, what began in Gaza must end in Gaza. But this, of course, is going to be a massive offensive, a massive undertaking. The IDF chief of staff, whom Israeli media has been alleging throughout the week is at odds with Prime Minister Netanyahu and with the political leadership over the exact plans for how this offensive will look or whether it was even a good idea in the first place. And also some rumors that he is pushing for Israel to accept the present ceasefire deal and abandon these military options. This is the allegations in the Israeli press that this is what the IDF chief of staff is thinking. Well, he was recorded today addressing reservist soldiers and stating that the IDF won't stop until a, quote, decisive victory is made over Hamas. So publicly there, flying in the face of these Israeli media reports. Now, in Tel Aviv today, a press conference held by reservist soldiers who say they're refusing their orders and will not return to the battlefield for this offensive, claiming some 300-plus reservists have joined their protest efforts, and these soldiers will be refusing their mobilization orders. And they're largely saying it is over the refusal to accept a present ceasefire and hostage deal that would see some hostages returned, but Prime Minister Netanyahu is saying his firm red line is all hostages all at once. And across the Mediterranean in Barcelona, Spain, a flotilla of dozens of vessels have now left port to sail for Gaza, attempting once again to break through the Israeli naval blockade. And once again, activist Greta Thunberg is aboard, along with Game of Thrones actor Liam Cunningham. Back in June, the first attempted sailing ended with that boat being boarded by Israeli forces, with all aboard detained and deported out of Israel. This time, it's not just a lone sailboat, Greta. It's going to be dozens of vessels that are on their way our direction. And reports are coming in here late tonight that U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio will visit Israel in 2 weeks' time. And according to the Times of Israel, the Prime Minister's office is attempting to set up another meeting between Prime Minister Netanyahu and President Trump when the Prime Minister travels to the United Nations General Assembly at the end of the month, which is a bit of surprise as well, knowing the momentum that is carried into the UN General Assembly, with multiple European states and Western states coming out and saying they will recognize the state of Palestine at the UNGA. It's interesting to see Netanyahu deciding he will be there in attendance as well. Greta?
Zach Anders in Tel Aviv, thank you. And the death toll in Afghanistan is rising. This after Sunday's strong earthquake hit the region. The Taliban, which rules Afghanistan, reports that more than 1,400 people have been killed, more than 3,000 people have been injured. These numbers could rise as rescue crews race to find survivors. The 6.0 magnitude quake toppled villages and trapped people under the rubble. The Taliban is asking for international assistance, but it is finding challenges because it's the Taliban. One example, the UK has pledged £1 million, but that money will be split among humanitarian groups and not given directly to the Taliban. Over the years, many international groups have pulled funding from Afghanistan due to its repressive Taliban government. Coming up, Secretary of HHS RFK Jr. is being called dangerous for his changes at the CDC. What does a former director of the CDC think? Dr. Robert Redfield joins me next when the record continues. The Centers for Disease Control and Prevention are facing some new questions and new criticism. Last week, CDC Director Dr. Susan Monarez was fired. She has lawyers fighting her firing, saying it was illegal. Several other CDC officials have resigned. They pointed to disagreements over vaccine policy and disagreements with Health and Human Services Secretary Robert F. Kennedy Jr. Yesterday, 9 former CDC directors wrote a guest essay in the New York Times. The headline is, "We ran the CDC. Kennedy is endangering every American's health." The former CDC directors in their essay cited recent firings, canceled investments in medical research, and Kennedy's, quote, dangerous and unscientific views. Former director of the CDC, Dr. Robert Redfield, joins me. Nice to see you, sir. And I asked for the show to make a call to you to see if you would come and talk about this before I even knew if you signed that essay or not, if you're one of the 9. I've since learned that you were not. Did they call you and ask you? And what are your thoughts on that essay?
Well, they did request that I consider signing it. I didn't agree with it. I obviously have a lot of confidence in Secretary Kennedy. I was disappointed in the tone of the op-ed in the New York Times. Obviously, I don't think Kennedy is dangerous for public health. And it was just disappointing to see them sort of cherry pick certain things that they disagreed with them and sort of make a statement that I thought was highly hyperbolic.
You know, it's sort of, when I first saw it, 9 former CDC directors, it sort of reminded me a little bit, and maybe unfairly, of the 51 former Intel, right before the 2020 election, Intel people who signed that letter, which was wrong, misleading. They said that it was all about Hunter Biden's laptop, which is real, and it wasn't Russian mischief. But the problem is that when you get that many people together and they use their former positions to say something, you know, it does have a cost. And maybe it does, I suppose there's a value, but it has a huge cost when they're wrong.
Yeah, it was disappointing. You know, two of them were acting directors. They weren't actually formally directors. 7 of them were directors. 1 of them was appointed by a Republican. The rest were appointed by Democrats. But I do think it was very political, their statement. I mean, you know, Kennedy clearly is aggressively looking for transparency on some of these decisions. I don't disagree with the decisions that were made with the COVID vaccine for children. The COVID vaccine should have never been recommended for children. But this group, since they were part of the group that recommended it for children, are trying to hold on to that being a correct decision. It was an incorrect decision. This vaccine doesn't prevent infection. It prevents serious illness and death. And children aren't at risk for serious illness and death. So in children, the risk of a side effect from the vaccine outweighs the benefit from it. For me, it's a 74-year-old with hypertension, diabetes. The risk of the vaccine is minimal compared to the risk that I could die from COVID. So, you know, I think people just are having a hard time admitting that maybe they made mistakes in some of the recommendations that were made on the COVID vaccine. They're digging the heels in. CDC needs major reform. Kennedy knows that. He's trying to do that. People don't like change. They're trying to get CDC back to its primary mission, which was a public health response agency. It had morphed into an academic institution. And these directors that were part of that letter were all the directors that helped take CDC from its original mission as a primary public health response agency and turn it into an academic institution. So again, I have confidence in Kennedy. I think, you know, Jim O'Neill, who's now the new acting director, I'm sure will get his hands around it. And, you know, we need CDC. It's an important organization, particularly in the area of epidemic control, outbreak investigation, and pandemic preparedness.
You know, that one of the issues, of course, is everything you just laid out. But I suspect that there's another issue. Like every government agency, there was a tremendous layoff in March, and a lot of government agencies here in D.C. You know, CDC, I don't, but there's a lot of bloat. You know that that there are a lot of jobs that it's time to sort of thin the organizations down to make them more fiscally responsible and effective for the American people. Is the CDC run effectively, efficiently? And I mean, were all those layoffs, did that harm the institution, or was that part of making it more effective for the American people?
I think it's in changing its focus in getting CDC back to a public health response agency. You know, a lot of the disease, people that were laid off were involved in chronic disease programs, injury programs, prevention programs, and Kennedy didn't eliminate those. He's just moving them out of CDC into a new entity that he's building within HHS for MAHA. So a lot of times, Greta, it's unfortunate, a lot of the press reporting on this has been non-accurate and obviously triggers people and they say, oh my God, he eliminated HIV prevention. No, he's moving it to another component of HHS. Oh, he eliminated, our approach to maternal child health. No, he's moving it to another component of HHS. He wants CDC to focus on its primary mission, pandemic preparedness, which I'm very concerned about, the potential for a bird flu pandemic. We can talk about that at some time when you have more time, and basically get CDC to be a public health response agency.
Well, now you got me curious about the bird flu. You're going to have to come back when we do have more time to talk about, because I'd like to learn more. Former CDC Director, Dr. Robert Redfield. Thank you, sir.
Yeah, thanks, Greta. God bless you. Yep, take care.
Now to an update on that big crime story we've been following out of Florida. It is the Donna Adelson trial. She's the wealthy matriarch of a family accused of hiring hitmen to kill her former son-in-law, law professor Dan Markel. Prosecutors are trying to prove that Donna Adelson worked with her son, Charlie Adelson, to plot the murder. On Friday, prosecutors rested their case. The defense is now putting its witnesses on the stand. Today, the jury heard from family friends. One of these friends testified that Donna Adelson was crying a lot while watching the trial of her son, Charlie Adelson. 2 years ago, he was convicted in the case. The friend also said Donna Adelson considered taking her own life. Another family friend said Donna was hysterical after finding out her former son-in-law was gunned down and murdered. The court wrapped up early for the day, a little before 3 p.m. Eastern. We have not heard from Donna Adelson. She has a constitutional right not to testify, but she may also elect to testify. If she does testify, it could be as soon as tomorrow. Coming up, President Trump is calling it the worst and most dangerous city in the world. Can you guess where that city is? What country? That when the record continues. A federal judge in California has ruled the Trump administration violated federal law when it deployed members of the National Guard and the United States Marines to Los Angeles. The president sent them in an effort to quell anti-ICE protests. Earlier today, U.S. District Court Judge Charles Breyer found the Trump administration violated the Posse Comitatus Act. The Posse Comitatus Act was passed in 1878. That act prohibits the use of the military for domestic law enforcement. In his ruling, Judge Breyer blocked the Trump administration from deploying or using the National Guard currently deployed in California. Judge Breyer put a pause on his ruling until September 12th. That's to give the Trump administration a time to appeal. Meanwhile, President Trump is going on a tirade about Chicago. The president posting on Truth Social, writing, quote, "Chicago is the murder capital of the world." The president also posting, quote, "Chicago is the worst and most dangerous city in the world by far. Governor Pritzker needs help badly. He just doesn't know it yet. I will solve the crime problem fast, just like I did in D.C., end quote. This afternoon, President Trump was asked about Chicago. Here is the president.
Have you decided you're definitely going to send National Guard troops to Chicago?
I didn't say when, but the answer is, look, Chicago's very interesting because I watched Pritzker get up and say about, we don't need help, we're safe. But 2 weeks ago, they had 6 people murdered.
Make your mind up on Chicago, though?
Well, we're going in. I didn't say when, we're going in. When you lose, look, I have an obligation. This isn't a political thing. I have an obligation.
National Police Association spokesperson and retired Chicago area police officer, Sergeant Betsy Brantner Smith joins me. Nice to see you.
Thanks for having me, Greta.
Okay, what's the story? Can you? I mean, obviously, we're a very political country right now. It's shirts or skins, Republicans or Democrats, but sort of stripping that away and looking at the condition in the streets of Chicago and what the people are going through. Does Chicago need help, outside help, federal help?
Well, absolutely. And Chicago has federal help. The Chicago Police Department already works with its federal partners, but I know that they would like more. The boots on the ground cops want more. The Chicago Police Department, like most large blue cities, is desperately short-staffed, and federal law enforcement is there, but they would like additional resources, I'm told. However, they've got such pushback from Governor Pritzker and from Mayor Brandon Johnson, who are conflating the facts about what's actually happening in Chicago and what the federal government can do.
What are the resources that do they need? Is it manpower? Is it equipment? Is it that the police force is not fully staffed because there's a morale problem? I mean, we have a staffing problem here in D.C. or have with the police. I know that that sort of the defund me really sort of it deterred people from wanting to be police because they were looked down upon for a while by a segment of our population. So what could help Chicago?
Well, definitely federal resources could help. And that could be everything from the FBI to the ATF. Even Mayor Brandon Johnson talked about this afternoon at his press conference. There's task forces, things like that can really help the police department. But you bring up a good point. Morale is terribly low in most big blue cities, especially in Chicago PD, where they have been demonized and vilified really for the last 10 years, and especially for the last 5. They have a mental health crisis in the department. They have a higher than national average suicide rate in the Chicago Police Department. And again, when you have a holiday weekend where at least 55 are shot, 7 murdered, we've got to do something. And instead, the governor of the state of Illinois spent his press conference time this afternoon vilifying law enforcement and basically asking people to resist, which is going to get cops hurt.
I do have the problem in Chicago that we've had here in D.C., which is D.C. is the dangerous part of the and when you include the surrounding area. It's D.C. that's dangerous. And the police, they can get their training here in the D.C., but then they can go across the river into Virginia or across the border into Maryland. They'll get treated a little better. The jobs are better. It's a little bit safer. The communities are safer. So D.C. is a little, oftentimes loses our police because the pastures are greener someplace else.
Absolutely. Very often, Chicago police officers, especially young ones, go to the suburbs. You know, the Chicago suburbs are some of the safest communities in this country, the ones that are, 20, 30 miles out of the city. And very often the suburbs pay better. But I'll tell you, the Chicago Police Department, the men and women of CPD are so incredibly dedicated to that beautiful city that the vast majority of them want to stay, but they don't want to be prosecuted for doing their job. They don't want to hear their mayor and some of their other leadership treat them badly and talk about them as though they are the problem. Pritzker and Mayor Johnson want to talk about the guns and how it's the fault of red states, while Chicago police officers are going shooting to shooting to shooting, mopping up the blood and trying to desperately to keep their community safe. And don't forget, Chicago cops have to live in the city. It's their city too. They just want to be cops and do their job.
And of course, the safer suburbs is, you have to have a little money, and it's the poor neighborhoods in Chicago that people can't afford to move to those safer spots. So, Sergeant Betsy Brantner Smith, thank you for joining me.
Thanks for having me, Greta.
Nearly 60 years after her death, investigators say there is now probable cause to believe that former Tennessee Sheriff Buford Pusser murdered his wife, Pauline Mullins Pusser. On August 12, 1967, Pauline Mullins Pusser was killed in what her husband, Tennessee Sheriff Buford Pusser, claimed was an ambush on a rural road near the Tennessee-Mississippi border. Pusser served as sheriff from 1964 to 1970. He gained national fame for his campaign against organized crime following his wife's murder. The Tennessee sheriff even inspired the Hollywood film Walking Tall, which was released in 1973. 1 year later, in 1974, Pusser died in a car crash. And today, we are learning there is probable cause to believe the late Tennessee sheriff murdered his wife. Here is District Attorney for Tennessee's 25th Judicial District, Mark Davidson.
The case file reveals inconsistencies in Buford Pusser's statements to law enforcement and others about Pauline's murder, including physical, medical, forensic, ballistic, and reenactment evidence that contradicts his version of events. The statement of Sheriff Pusser and his then chief deputy and Sheriff Buford Pusser's own statements that events did not occur as stated by Buford Pusser, and that Pauline Pusser was more likely than not shot outside the vehicle and then placed inside the vehicle. Our office, after review of the case file, believes that the TBI has produced evidence sufficient to create probable cause, meaning more likely than not, that would allow us, if he were alive today, to present an indictment to the McNairy County Grand Jury for their consideration against Buford Pusser for the murder of his wife, Pauline.
Coming up, why is one city planning to spend $400,000 on geese? Start guessing. That when the record continues. The California sunshine is so good that these geese do not want to leave. Instead of flying north in the summer, these birds have taken over the parks in the Bay Area town of Foster City year-round. Officials and residents say it's a problem. The geese produce hundreds of pounds of droppings per day that leaves the parks often looking like this. Besides all the germs, people say the geese have also been known to scare the children away. So the city wants to get rid of the geese by scaring them back. Last month, the city approved a plan that includes employing border collies to chase them, as well as using lasers and bird-shaped drones. The plan's price tag, $400,000. And we have some good news about us, about this news show. Starting next week, our news show, The Record, moves to 4 p.m. Eastern. And it's the perfect time for this news show and for any news show, since each day at 4 p.m. Eastern, 3 big news events occur. The stock markets close, court ends for the day, and congressional hearings pretty much turn off the lights at 4 p.m. Eastern, too. That means this show at 4 p.m. Eastern will be at the tip of the completion of most of the major news of the day in the market, the court, and Congress. This allows me to do more of what I love, reporting the news that just happened and then explaining it. So what happens in this time slot at 6 p.m. Eastern? My very good friend Carl Higbie will take over this time slot. And you all know Carl. He will, as only Carl can, captivate you with his thoughts and opinions of the day's news. My colleague Chris Salcedo, who refers to himself as a liberty-loving Latino, moves into Carl's spot at 5 p.m. Eastern. So beginning at 6 p.m. Eastern, right after I sign off at 4:59 p.m., you have an action-packed block of opinion shows. Chris at 5 p.m. and Carl at 6 p.m. I know you're going to like this. And on a personal note, it does fulfill what I wanted to do here at Newsmax when I first sat down with Newsmax more than 3.5 years ago to discuss joining the network. But as it all shook out 3.5 years ago, I got the 6 p.m. Eastern slot. Don't get me wrong. I have immensely enjoyed this 6 p.m. hour, reporting from or doing reports from Ukraine, Israel, Poland, Ecuador, Colombia, and I've had so many interesting guests and powerful people, including senators, members of Congress. But remember, those senators and members of Congress often need to pre-tape because they have to run to the airport at 5:30 or they have to go to a dinner. But now, with my show at 4 p.m. Eastern, I'm going to get those senators and members of Congress live before they run off to the airport or dinner. Frankly, if you talk to anyone in the news business, they'll tell you doing live interviews are much more fun than taped interviews. There's another plus to this change for me. Newsmax has just built me a brand new home studio, and I thank them for that. So by finishing my 4 p.m. show at 5 p.m., I now get to go home to do hits during the evening hours as news breaks and as needed. This was harder when I was driving home in D.C. traffic when I got off this show at 7 p.m. Eastern. So I'm excited about the change. It's a new challenge. I hope you watch and enjoy your evening. Rob Schmidt Tonight is up next. People think news just happens. It doesn't. It happens because there's someone there to capture the moment, to explain it and share it. That's my job. I go where news breaks and give you the facts. Join me for The Record on Newsmax.